All right, great. So Pam just had handed over the session to me. For everyone who's joining, thanks for joining the webinar. Of course, anyone looking at the recording on the YouTube channel, um, this is actually the second webinar in a series of webinars on the ARM module. What we're going to focus on today is an extension of the first webinar series that we did, which is you can find that on the MIS website or on their YouTube channel, along with a lot of other great content and topics. What we did in the original session is we talked about the core concepts of Epicor ARM. Epicor ARM, exactly what that acronym shows, is Advanced Requisition Management. And to put that as plainly as possible, what it means is that it's an advanced tool set for procurement. It manages the entire procure-to-pay process within Epicor, but at each step of the process, it gives users additional functionality and additional richness in the user experience. So focusing on the core requisition and approval process in series number 1, today we're going to expand that topic and give due diligence to the AP approval workflow, the process of creating requisitions, creating invoices, matching invoices, and approving invoices, as well as the process of creating a request for quote, which of course are two completely separate topics, but we're going to tackle them in depth in this session. All right, so back to the discussion. We'll start with a brief introduction of ARM, of these two modules around accounts payable and around RFQs, and then we're going to get into the software. We're just going to do a day in the life, and for a lot of people, the best way to see value, the best way to see time savings is to compare how do we do things today? How do we approve invoices, create invoices, communicate today versus what does that look like with the tool? And really the mission of this module and of the ARM product is to make the process faster, easier, and apply more control a lot of times in the procurement, approval, and AP processes that are currently in place. All right. So again, when we talk about ARM, it's a module that's modular. And what that means is that each piece of the functionality, each piece of this diagram is used by some of our customers and not used by other customers, right? So some people have different problems that they're trying to solve, but the product itself covers the whole breadth of the procure to pay process. So some people, they have a high volume of RFQs, so they need a better, more easy, user-friendly way to create and send RFQs to multiple vendors and get responses in an automated way, right? So that's a problem they're looking to solve. Other people are more focused on requisitions, multi-dimensional approval structures that match their corporate approval structure, right? Creating purchase orders or having decentralized receiving or mobile approval or mobile receiving through their phone or through an email or through a tablet. And then other people, of course, which we're going to be talking about today, are trying to solve the problem around AP, right? How can we automate approval? How can we automate the 2- and 3-way matching process, as well as bring in and tie it back into Epicor without creating silos of data or silos of processes? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Again, depending on the problem you're trying to solve, each one of these coins, as I would call them, are kind of added in or taken away depending on the problem we're trying to solve. Hopefully, and the way more organizations are going is using the system across the breadth of that procure to pay process. All right, so when we talk about advanced functionality, what are we talking about, right? That's always the number one question. Well, what do you mean you do things differently? Or what do you mean you have advanced functionality or advanced workflows? So what I did is I compiled a few examples that we didn't show in the first webinar, of the ARM series, to give some examples. What we did do in that webinar is we demonstrated each one of these examples. All right. So when we talk about advanced functionality, what we're talking about is with the ARM module, it's mobile, it's web-based, it's a modern, flexible, I always like to call it a consumer grade application, right? You have an ERP system and then you have Amazon, right? There's a big difference between consumer and business grade. And what we always like to say is it's a very easy to use, streamlined interface to interact with the purchasing process, whether it be a requisition, an approval, an invoice, or an invoice approval. It's a very modern system that we're going to actually be looking at in just a few minutes. Other very common examples are, being able to tie back into the Epicor part classes, the categories, being able to use efficiency tools like templates and copy features. What that means is, hey, I did this requisition before, or this invoice. I just want to copy it. All the lines are different, or are the same, but I just need to change the values, right? So it's a very a good tool from an efficiency standpoint. Having order status visibility, approval tracker. Hey, where's the bottleneck? We need to pay this invoice, or we need to approve this requisition. What's the holdup, right? Having that visibility is a huge factor in this module. The budget checking, that's something that we'll look at today, so I won't go too far in depth on that. Multi-dimensional approvals. This is going to be a huge concept today, but I'm not going to go too far into it because we covered it extensively on the first webinar that we did on ARM. The concept is that with this module, you can use multi-dimensional criteria such as location, GL code, value, category, part class, etc., to determine if this happens, if this invoice needs to be approved, or if this requisition needs to be approved, it needs to go to these people, right? So it follows an approval hierarchy that a lot of organizations demand in their business, right? People who use blanket orders, enhanced blanket orders, automatic email notifications, and reminders. We're going to be talking about that in the AP invoice module. If someone needs to approve an invoice, or an invoice is out of tolerance, then they need to do their job, right? But if they forget to do it, which is very common, or when they forget to approve something, the system will automatically remind them depending on how you configure the reminders. If it's every 8 hours, if it's every 4 hours, etc. So it's a very commonly used tool set within ARM. And one of the biggest, probably more so from a procurement side, not so much from AP, is that you don't need to be an Epicor user to access the procurement workflow in ARM. So the ARM user login is different than the Epicor concurrent user license, right? Which gives you the flexibility to say, hey, if we need to discuss this invoice, if we need to discuss this approval, if we need to discuss this requisition, right? You can give your maintenance manager, you can give your field service reps access to ARM to submit their requisitions, to submit their communications, to submit their attachments, invoices, etc. They're receiving all done mobilely without logging into the Epicor ERP system. And of course, kind of a funny one, we had reject individual lines that came up on a demonstration very recently that I left on there just in the past week, which they said, hey, if we get a requisition that's for 10 lines in the standard system, and that one of 10 lines is wrong, we need to reject the whole thing. They need to re-enter those 9 lines and resubmit the requisition, right? So I thought, oh, okay. Well, in ARM, you can just reject individual lines within an RFQ, within a request, or when processing an invoice as well. So it's very important to point that out, apparently for a few users. All right, so the main problem we're trying to solve for the AP team, as well as procurement, which again, we covered in the first webinar session, but the concept is that a lot of people are doing their approvals and their communication for both purchase request, purchase approval, and AP invoice approval and AP invoice processing like this, right? They're sending emails, they have Excel spreadsheets, they have a literally paper-based workflows that go around to sign things off, or they're sending the invoice, signing it, scanning it, sending it back to the AP team to say that it's approved, right? So the problem we're trying to solve is we're trying to put in place a framework where a lot of times the current framework looks like this, right? So there's a lot of efficiencies to be had when processes look like this, and there's a lot of audit trail risk and ways to improve from an audit perspective, from a compliance perspective, control, and of course, efficiency is far and away number one. All right, so let's dig in. So like I said, I'm going to use a couple slides to introduce the core concepts of the RFQ module and the AP module, and then we'll just jump into the software and go from there. All right, so the first concept, request for quote, I'm assuming familiar to most people. The concept is that to get the best pricing, or to have a better chance at getting the best pricing, you want to send a quote for items to multiple vendors to then get their response. So what we can do within the ARM module is we can create and automatically email a request to one or multiple vendors, automate the communication back and forth, the reminders, the close dates, the, hey, we've approved this or accepted it or we've received it. We can automate that information and then pull the winner, quote unquote, the vendor that you choose, directly into the procure to pay process without double entering information, without having to email people, without having to send a purchase order manually. It happens by going into the requisition, which then flows through to approval routing, that center coin there, which then becomes your purchase order in Epicor ERP and allows you to receive it either in ARM or within Epicor ERP. All right, so that is the concept. With the ARM AP approval module, again, the core concept is that we want to add automation and control to AP processing. Whether it's approval, whether it's data entry, or whether it's 2- and 3-way matching, we check all those boxes, and that's what we're going to look at today, right? So when we're creating the invoice, we pull it in from a new AP work list. The screen will show the actual image of the invoice if we choose, and then from there we're going to match it to the receipt or the PO directly in Epicor ARM, and then that will come into Epicor as a fully approved invoice ready for posting and payment. Okay, and that is my introduction. So we will jump into the software now. And Damien and Pam, I might lean on you just a little bit when we're transitioning screens. Sometimes it will go gray and I can't tell when we can see it again. Anyone who's listening, go ahead and just chime in. Can we see the ARM login screen?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much, both of you. Okay, so where I'm going to start the process is we're quite literally in the beginning. We're going to go procure all the way to pay. So I will create a requisition. We're going to approve it. We're going to watch it become a purchase order. We're going to receive it. And then where we're going to spend the majority of the time after doing that is in the AP module. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. It'll be a good reminder or a good refresher for people who didn't see the first webinar for the first few minutes. And then again, we'll transition and actually pay the invoice for the PO that we've just created. All right, so we'll log in as Maurice. Now, Maurice in this example is going to represent a very common user. So he doesn't have the authority to approve. He doesn't have the authority to change vendors or create vendors or change configuration of the system. He's just a daily user, and he's going to be our guinea pig here today to do the demonstration. All right, so let's go ahead and do just that. Let's create a requisition. All right, so the requisition name, we're going to say, hey, Maurice just he just hired a new employee, and that employee needs a starter kit, right? So we'll say that new employee, if I can spell right, new employee kit. So he's going to just name that requisition whatever. In this case, it's not urgent, it's not prepaid, so we'll just add the items. Now, one of the great things that I covered in the first webinar series is that ARM can be searched like an ERP system very extensively. It can be searched like Google by description, or it can be scrolled through by category just like Amazon.com with great pictures for people who are used to that. So we'll go ahead and add a couple items here. And then let's go ahead and, because he's a new employee, right, let's get him a laptop. That's a common item. So we'll do, let's just go laptop. We'll see what happens. All right, and there's one with a picture, so I like that. Sold. We'll add that item and we'll finish. So what we just did, I'm going to focus your eyes at the top, was just a couple clicks of a button. With looking at the catalog, we've created a new requisition. Now, of course, in the first webinar we talked about there's a lot of efficiency tools. There's a lot of different ways to create a requisition. In this case, I dove directly into the catalog to decide the different line items in my requisition. So what you'll see here is there's multiple vendors. The Epicor ERP system tells us what the preferred vendors are. It tells us what the pricing is within the system. And it even looks at the Epicor budget to tell us, hey, you're way over budget in this case. You're, let's look at this one. You're over budget in this case. Oh, I see, this is for a project. Okay, so in this case, for the GL budget, we have lots of budget. It's green. Now, if I was purchasing it, in this case, it defaulted to a project. Okay, so it's telling me specifically for this project or this project phase, I'm over budget. Probably not a good example, but from a GL perspective, it's telling me, hey, for this GL budget, you've used 38,000, you have 61 remaining, and this requisition will consume $1 of that budget. Okay, so it gives us that budget indicator along the way. So what I'll do, just for the sake of example, I'll delete this because I only wanted a laptop for my new user, and I'm going to submit it. Me as Maurice, my requisition, my job is done. Now what happens in the background is the people in the approval chain get an email. And this is a topic that we're going to talk about when we start doing the AP invoice. If we remember from the first webinar, the approval trees that we can set up in ARM are extremely granular. So in this case, it's telling me that for this laptop, based on the category, we have Roy as the IT manager. So he needs to approve this item because that item so happens to be associated with a part class that's considered IT. The other example is Jen. Is it a location approver? And it's saying that, hey, you're purchasing it for this location. It's hitting her budget, her location. So she needs to go ahead and approve this as well. Obviously, if it exceeds her threshold, it goes right up to Douglas and on to Denham, the CEO. All right. Now, the reason I wanted to pause there and recommunicate that, recover that, is because this concept of approvals is exactly the same engine, same concept as an invoice. Okay, so a very functional, very robust tool to ensure that if I do have an invoice, when we get to the invoice, if it needs to be approved or it falls outside of tolerance requiring approval, it's going to go through the corporate structure automatically. Okay, so let's go ahead and log in. Let's approve this and continue on the path to procurement. So we'll log in as Jen. Now, Jen would have got an email, of course, and she could have clicked on that email, or she can log into her dashboard and say there's requisitions requiring her approval. So let's log in there. And here it is. We named it New Employee Kit. It's easy to find. Let's go ahead and open that up. Now, if she would have clicked on the link in her email, she would be brought right to this screen. Oh, here's a one-line item. This is what you need to approve. It's for Maurice, and you have lots of budget in this scenario. Okay, so in this case, I'm happy with that. It's just a proof of concept. Let's go ahead and approve this, and we can see, again, here's the efficiency tools coming into play. Where's the bottleneck? Who are we waiting on? The same concept with an invoice is Jen has approved this requisition. Now we're waiting on Roy. Okay, so same concept with an invoice. Once we get to that stage, if we are waiting on something, if something's been delayed, we can come into the system as a user and see where the bottleneck is. Very powerful. So let's quickly log into Roy. All right, same exact concept here. He has requisitions requiring his approval. He would have also got an email if we've so configured the system like that. There's my new employee kit coming up to him based on the date it's first on his list. Let's go ahead and approve this thing, right? Roy can also see, oh man, Jen's already approved it. Now they're just waiting on me, right? So we'll go ahead and approve this, right? Now this has been ordered. The status has updated. It's told Maurice all along the way where this is in the system. And we can also come into the tracker and just see, hey, that the original requisition that Maurice started went through the pro forma order stage, which is a tool or a stage that we talked about in the first webinar. And now it's been sent out automatically. This purchase order lives in Epicor ERP. This is the Epicor ERP purchase order at this point. Okay, let's go back. So what do we need to do? We need to receive it before we can process our invoice. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll fast forward a couple days. This is going to be an efficient week for Maurice's team. Let's say that Rachel logs in. She comes in the morning and her system's telling her, oh, wow, you actually have a lot of purchase orders ready to be received. She must have been coming back from vacation. 448. She's in trouble or she's been on break. We'll see. So she clicks on that. And then again, by date, it's going to come up first. And we can do our receiving right here from this screen. Now, we could receive this in the traditional Epicor way. There's absolutely no problem with doing it. You can do it in either system. But in the case of showing the ARM workflow, we're going to continue the process in ARM, and we're going to go ahead and receive this invoice. So let's do that. I'm happy with that. We're going to go ahead and receive. And what is my PO? It's 849. Okay. Perfect. So that was the requisitioning and approval and receiving process. Now, let's go back into Maurice because I gave him the permission to also process invoices. So he's a dual user today. And we're going to actually create an invoice. All right. So let's fast forward now another day. And let's say Maurice comes in. He's now putting on his AP processing hat. What we'll do is we have the concept of a work list. And actually, I want to take a step back before we get there, because I want to show the way that the system's going to behave. All right, so we'll actually log in as an administrator. I want to show the setup of why this system is going to behave the way it does. All right, let's go ahead and make this larger. So one of the concepts is approval. Like I mentioned, we have approval trees that are very granular, very robust. And one thing that we have is, like I mentioned, we can approve by GL, by location, by category. We have an advanced tree, which is, the try to stump us tree. And then we also have AP specific trees, right? So very important. A lot of times people will have a different hierarchy of spend, of criteria, depending on whether it's a request to purchase or a request to pay an invoice, right? So we have separate trees, and in this case, we have our GL tree. So the AP invoices is based off of GL. Let's have a look at that. And what we can see here is that we're saying that if we're trying to pay an invoice with a natural account code of 1200, then Adam is our approver, and he can approve up to 2000. All right. In this case, Jen manages the account code of 00, or sorry, that's an exclusion. She manages the location in this account segment of 00, which means she can approve anything up to $1,000 on an invoice. All right, so we're talking about the invoice right now that we're about to process. But we also support the concept of exclusions, meaning that, hey, it might be for her location, but if the third segment is a 2, for example, maybe that's a marketing budget or it's a marketing department, then it doesn't go through her approval. Someone else would handle that approval, right? So we take in the concept of exclusions of direct digits of the GL chain. Very powerful. So anyways, the reason I wanted to show you that is we're going to try to break the system in this demonstration. I want to trigger an approval. Okay, so that's the first concept. So we'll see that based on the GL segments, it's going to go to Jen or it's going to go to Adam. Now, the second concept that I wanted to talk about is the concept of tolerance. So when would we need to approve an invoice? Well, we need to approve an invoice if it falls out of tolerance, right? So if we have a miscellaneous invoice, an invoice not related to a purchase order, well, then it's going to there's going to be a mismatch of tolerance by 100%, because what they're asking us to pay is not related to any kind of an invoice. So that tolerance, that miscellaneous invoice will trigger the approval path. The other concept is if it is related to a purchase order, but it's, in this case, I've configured the system to say if the unit cost is above 2% of the, or below 2% of the agreed price, it's going to trigger approval. Or we can select specific amounts. Some people like to say, well, if it's anything more than $20 or more than X amount of dollars, we want to manage it, right? So we also have that flexibility. So the case that I'm trying to make is that from an efficiency standpoint, if we have an invoice that matches, right, it's been pre-approved from a purchase order standpoint, there should be nothing that I have to do. It's going to flow straight through the system. It's not going to trigger a manual approval through ARM. It's going to go and just automatically go through to an approved invoice ready to be paid. However, in our demonstration, what we're going to show is that if it does exceed the tolerance, it's going to trigger the approval path, which means the people who need to approve it all get an email, they get a notification, they have a proactive dashboard that's telling them, hey, you have something to approve, and here's why. Right? So it's a very robust tool. It's a very streamlined tool to process invoices in an efficient manner, rather than that email, or rather than just using one or two criteria to determine who needs to engage that email. Okay, so let's go ahead and log out of the administrator and back into Maurice, who still has his AP hat on. Okay, and he sits down. It's the beginning of the day. He has his MIS coffee in front of him. He's ready to go, and he opens up his work list. Now, the work list represents a file on your system or some location where you've scanned in all new invoices, the images, and it goes to that file. Right? ARM looks at that file and says, here's everything new. Okay. So what he's going to do, what Maurice is going to do, is going to say, all right, here's a new invoice. Let's go ahead and look it up and create a new invoice. And what it does is it automatically will pull in the image. So in this case, I can go ahead and copy the invoice number. We'll put that there. Ooh. And then I just select the vendor. So in this case, it's IT Experts, because I purchased the laptop earlier in our demonstration. And I'm happy with that. I can go ahead and create my invoice, and we'll see what happens now, right? Now, what's great about this is that the screen splits. If I had a dual screen, of course, I could pop it out to my dual screen, but it basically allows me to look at the actual image of the invoice when I'm populating in and matching the invoice amount. So in this case, the first step that I need to do, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit, is I take the total and I need to plug it in here. Right, so in this case, it's 1,530, one extra zero. And the next thing I need to do is I can see that this is related to purchase order 790. All right, so it's telling me, well, I should probably look in my receipts. Now, what's great about this tool is it's going to pull in a list of all my received purchase orders, but non-invoiced receipts, right? And it's going to bring that in specifically to IT Experts, specific to that vendor. So it's a great tool to make this happen automatically. Like I said, the purchase order was 790. You can see here we've been purchasing a lot. So let's go ahead and select that. And that will bring in that system. Okay. Now what we can see here is that all the information, the vendor information, the line detail of that purchase order gets brought in automatically. However, look at here. See, we have a variance of $30. Well, why is that? As an AP clerk, maybe I'd investigate. Well, I can see my original line was $1,500. That matches the PO. But in this case, the vendor tacked on a $30 freight charge. Okay. So as an AP clerk, I need to handle that situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a miscellaneous line, right? The exact same concept. If I had an invoice not related to an invoice, I still need to add in some detail. So in this case, I'm going to say, just random ID or item, description, some information about it. How much was it? It was, in this case, $30. Sorry, quantity was one. $30. Line comment. All right. And then I go ahead and I will save and close that. So what that's going to do is that's going to bring in a new line to the AP invoice. It's going to also budget check it. So in this case, I have a default miscellaneous line, which is also tied to Epicor. It's saying, hey, you have $6,000, and and this would probably be configured. I'd probably have a shipping GL account code. So in this case, for the sake of argument, it would say, okay, well, for miscellaneous shipping charges, you have a budget of 6,000. So far, you've used 620. This requisition is going to consume 30 more of that, which is going to leave you with 5,380, right? It's a very cool tool, not necessarily for me as the person processing the invoice, but probably more important for the people who are going to need to approve this invoice. That information at a click of a button is paramount. So what you can see now is we've added that line. the lines have updated. The variance is now 0, but because it exceeds the original purchase order, or it's an extra spend, it should trigger the approval chain. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've already saved it. I will submit this. AP invoice submitted. Perfect. Okay. And just like my requisition, as an AP invoice person, I can see, hey, this vendor's knocking on our door. They're calling us. Why haven't we paid? Well, sorry. It looks like Jen hasn't approved it yet, right? So it gives you that visibility. Now, I could reach out and send her a note automatically, and use the system for that communication if I need to remind Jen. Like mentioned, Jen would have got an email with the notification she has something to approve. She also will get a reminder. So if she does forget in X amount of hours or X amount of days, however it's configured, she'll get a reminder that, hey, you have this invoice outstanding that needs to be approved. All right. So let's go ahead and just quickly log into Jen just to show the difference between a requisition, which she approved, and the invoice. All right. So if you remember, Jen had requisitions requiring her approval. We clicked on that link last time. In this case, her dashboard also says, hey, you have AP requiring your approval. So let's go ahead and open that up. And here it is. Here's our invoice number. Let's go ahead and click on that. She, as an approver, this is very powerful, also gets an image of the invoice. Very good. She sees the details. She sees the notes that said there's an unexpected shipping charge. She has the attachment if she did need to send it outside of ARM or whatever. So in this case, it was no problem. It happens that it was a miscellaneous shipping charge. She's going to go ahead and approve this. That AP invoice is created, and that's it. Now we're done. So now what's so powerful about this is this invoice, this attachment, this image is now in Epicor ERP 10, right? So any attachments to a purchase order in ARM is also viewable in Epicor ERP, and any attachments to the invoice in ARM also integrate automatically and are viewable in Epicor ERP. It's that easy, right? And that's a game changer for a lot of people who who are processing invoices, and then they need to attach it in Epicor, need to approve it outside and then attach it, right? So the job is done. So let's go ahead and look at that. Let's prove that point out. So we'll go into the invoice tracker, and my memory is, we'll let that load. What was my invoice number? There we go. Perfect. Let's go ahead and find this. There we go. We're done loading. And now we'll search for that invoice that we just created through ARM, integrated into ERP. There we go, unposted. My 2 lines. Now I think, again, this came up on a recent session. Is the focus of the session was attachments. Oh, it's attachments here, and we're sending it over there. Look at that. So this attachment already viewable, already ready to see in Epicor ERP, right? Line level details. So very important, a great tool. And if there's any scenarios or what if scenarios or approval questions, if you want to try to stump us with some criteria around approval routing within your organization, happy to take that on. Go ahead and contact Pam or Karen or Kendra over at MIS, and we'll set up a session to go through that. All right, so I'm gonna conclude the AP discussion and topic there. What I want to flow to now is the RFQ. So completely separate. They're not associated with each other, other than it's part of a process. But for some people, they want additional RFQ functionality. So let's go back into ARM and create some RFQs, because we want to talk about that conversation. Now, as I log in, I'm just going to check in. I'm going to ring phone a friend. Damien, if you're still on, was there anything around AP that you wanted to talk about, or any scenarios that you commonly see in a demonstration that you wanted to discuss before I transition?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well explained. I think one of the very common questions that we get, and while we won't have time to show it today, is a lot of people are getting on board with the concept of IDC, intelligent data capture, whereby their scan also is able to identify and add context around the image that it scans. Like, for example, as Dan was showing you with that last PDF, you could see quite clearly on the scan that there was invoice numbers, there was total amounts, there was the IT experts logo. Now, with like recently with invoice scanning, you can now capture that information, and you can use your software to actually populate those fields so that you don't have the scenario anymore where Dan was having to enter things like the invoice number and the vendor manually. So if you are in an environment where you do have a high volume of invoices to be processed, scanning can be a good option. The point I wanted to raise that Dan hadn't mentioned about that is that ARM does support scanning. It can create associated XML files for those people in the know. XML files that associate with a PDF, so that when you open the PDF from the work list, you'll notice that all of the information that Dan added will automatically be there, and it's the job of the AP clerk merely to confirm that what the scan has seen is actually correct. So again, it's just another level and another way that you can cut down your processing time with ARM.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm glad you spoke to that. That comes up a lot in demonstrations. Do we support it? Is that something on the roadmap? Absolutely. Yeah, so it's a great point. Thanks for that, Damien. Okay, again, I'm going to transition to a separate topic, a different train of thought, which is request for quote. All right. So if you remember in my initial procure to pay session, I started with a requisition, right? Where I did that on the screen, I can also create a new invoice, template, standing orders, etc. But in this case, I want to create an RFQ. So it's just a click of a button to go ahead and enable the RFQ. All right, so the reason that people, again, want to do this is they want to transmit and get the best price to multiple vendors, get their responses in an efficient way. And the reason people get excited about this module is it's an automated communication tool. It's easy to use. And again, if that person so happens to be a mobile or home-based employee, it gives them that flexibility to use the software wherever they may be. Okay, so in this case, I can come up with some information. That the open date is today. Let's say that we'll give them 1 week to reply. We'll give them 1 week to reply, but we'll give them a couple days to actually send us the information. Let's go ahead and say let's keep with the theme of new employees. So let's do laptops. Maybe if you remember in our invoice, we purchased the T41. Maybe there's some other options out there. Maybe we want to see if we should be purchasing a different model or just from a different vendor. Okay, so the same way we created that requisition, we can also create the RFQ. So there it is. There's my T41. Let's go ahead and add that. Let's see what else is in the catalog. What else should I know about? I need to shop around for the best price point. So I'm going to see what other laptops we have available. Sorry, I meant to do that here. Laptops. This is going to be looking at our internal catalog. And okay, so I have some other options. I have the T41, the T42, the T60. In this case, I'm assuming the similarity that they may be similar. So we can type in some notes here, hey, maybe let us know about shipping charges this time or anything else, right? So there's my 2 items. That's what I care about. That's what I'm going to send to these vendors. I'm going to invite vendors now. I'm going to say that, let's choose a broad one. Let's go with this vendor. And I'm going to add another vendor to make it competitive. In almost every demonstration, and Damien's probably smiling, we get asked, hey, when we send this automated responses and updates and et cetera to the vendors, can the vendors see that who the other vendors are on the RFQ? So it's a reasonable question, but of course, no. So this is each vendor is receiving their own separate communication. There's no transparency into, who they might be competing against. So I'll knock that one out before we get there. Okay, so what we did in just a few seconds is we said we want these two vendors to bid on these two items. All right, when I hit the send RFQ button, a few things are going to happen. They're going to get an email from the ARM system that has two attachments, right? In the body of the email, it's going to say, give the details of the RFQ. In the attachment, it's going to give them a PDF spreadsheet, and we'll actually look at this once we hit the send button, a PDF spreadsheet that summarizes what we're looking for. If I had a description or if I had packing details or whatever it is, that would be in the PDF. And then it'll also send an Excel spreadsheet, which gives them a method to reply, right? And the reason that's an efficient way for them to reply is that we can import this is the word I was looking for, import this into ARM to populate all the details, all the lines, all the responses without having to key anything in. So it's a great tool for not only internally an efficiency tool, but it's also nice for the vendor where they can just simply type in the fields, attach the email, send it back, and they're done. They don't have to create the name. They don't have to create the spreadsheet, etc. It's all done on your forms, your paper. So a few different ways that they can respond. But without talking about, let's just show it, right? So let's send this off. Okay. Now let's go ahead and fast forward now, right? So we just sent this off. I realize that they have all got their emails. They're all responding. Let's fast forward and pretend this is a couple days, right? So in this case, let's say that Acme, they just did a reply all to the email, and in the email they wrote, hey, for these two, we can give you this price, right? So as a procurement manager or whoever has access to the system, I can come in here and I can say, okay, they can respond or they can supply both of these, no problem. And they can also give us a price of, what do we pay on the invoice? I think it was like $1,000, Damien, but for the sake of argument, let's just say, yeah, I think it was $999. And in this case, let's go for the T41. Maybe that's a better computer. We'll go 1,500 for that specific laptop. We'll save that. All right. Go ahead and save this. We'll accept that. Okay. So now what this means is that we've accepted this. And what will also happen if we've configured it, and most people do it this way, is now an email has just went out to this vendor, Acme, and said, hey, we got your offer. Thanks for responding. So it's a way to give them notification that we have got it. It's in our system, right? Why is that a game changer for the procurement team? Because like all purchasing teams, they're getting blasted by every salesperson on every RFQ. This will keep them at bay for just a little bit longer. It's a great tool for that. All right. ABC, on the other hand, they populated our invoice or our attachment that was on that email. So they said, hey, we can give you a $199. Our prices are completely off here. $199 and $200. We're giving you a hell of a deal, I guess. And they would send that back to you. You, as a procurement officer, would say, okay, we just got their email, and I'm going to import this. And Damien, where am I looking for the? Oh, there it is. Usually I populate my screen like this and it doesn't hide it. So there's the import button. So I'm going to import this file. Let's go ahead and I'm trying to remember where this would be, desktop. And there's my RFQ, right? So what's great about this is the document automatically sends and saves itself as RFQ specific to that vendor, specific to the RFQ number. That all happens automatically through ARM sending it in that email. So it's a great tool, easy to find. Okay, so we attach that, we import it. Let's go ahead and open that. And there's all my information, right? The SKU numbers, if there was additional information, he wrote us a note. Oh, let's see what it says. Ah, there we go. It includes the power cable, right? So if there's any notes from the vendor, that's going to show up in the system as well, right? So I understand, procurement, that, a lot of times it's hard to get our vendors to do business in our way. If we can, it's such an efficiency gain, right? So in this case, you can see that the process of uploading the system, the RFQ is helpful. So let's look what we have here. Now on our summary pages, we have received, and we've accepted this one. So, we didn't hit the accept button on the ABC vendor page, but you get the idea. It just notifies them that it's received. And then number two, it notifies them that we've accepted it. It's in our system. So now we need to choose who the winner is, right? So we can open up the response. We can select the winner. In this case, it's not letting us select it. So let's go ahead and open that up. That's because I haven't accepted it. There we go. User error, right? Okay, so in this case, so now I can select from the summary page. Wow, ABCE is obviously clearly better. There's a huge price difference, so it's probably a good indicator that we did something wrong. But for the sake of argument, I'm going to go ahead and say this is our winner, just to prove the point. Now you can accept. Remember, we had two separate lines. You can accept individual lines from each vendor. That's not a problem. For the sake of the example, we're going to go ahead and create this requisition. I've selected it here. Location code. Okay, so it's asking me for some information where I want to cost this, basically where the location code is that I work. I select that, and there we go. Now I've just went from an RFQ to a requisition. Now, and if you remember from my slide deck, let's go ahead and go back to that slide deck to prove the point, right? What will happen now is that this requisition will go through the normal process. It'll go through approval, it'll be approved, it will generate the purchase order in Epicor ERP. We'll send it either through ARM or through Epicor, however it's configured, to the vendor, and then we'll receive it. So why this is such a differentiator for customers is that this requisition becoming a PO didn't create any extra data entry, any extra approval, any extra communication. It's all contained directly in ARM, right? So once we create the purchase order, receive it, pay the invoice, the communication, the audit trail, and the efficiency tools never left Epicor ARM, right? So it's about consistency, and that's why some people want to use this module outside of the core framework of Epicor. Okay. Pam, Damien, that concludes the session that I had on the agenda today. Again, for everyone who's watching on the YouTube channel or watching on the webinar, really the concept was to use the first webinar of ARM as an introduction, and then use this webinar, the second in the series, use that as a building block, and use that to then focus on some more functional tools within the ARM module. With that, Damien and Pam, is there any closing comments that you had, or are we good to leave it there?
No, we appreciate it. Do you mind popping up your last slide?
Yes, good call.
It's not my first rodeo.
What would I do without
you? Thank you very much. For more information, you can always contact MIS Consulting and Sales at sales@mis-c.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.